To the College Dems and to University of New Hampshire, all of you here at Durham, thank you so much. From what I can see, looks to me like the vast majority of you are students, or certainly student age. I see a couple of exceptions, but in general, this is a conversation, it seems to me, with the youth of the United States. I'm particularly fascinated by your generation because you're not 20th century people. You weren't even born in the 20th century, most of you, and for those of you who were, you just sort of hung out there as babies for a while. Now, every century has its own mindset. The mindset of the 20th century was different than the 19th, and the mindset of the 21st century is different than the 20th. 20th century mindset was a Newtonian paradigm, very mechanistic model of things. The idea at the base of Western materialism was the idea that the world is a big machine. And if you want to change things, you simply tweak the machine. And within that mindset, consciousness was given very little significance. This now is the 21st century, and you are 21st century people. The 21st century mindset is much more holistic, much more whole person. It is recognized that there are internal dynamics that drive events as much as there are external dynamics. It is recognized with the most conscious and intelligent observations in the 21st century that we are going to have to deal not only on the level of symptom, but also on the level of cause, and that many of our problems stem at their deepest level from a cause which is internal. So every generation individuates. You are individuating, however, not just from a former generation, but literally from a former century. Now, I'm old enough that I remember a time long, long ago, far, far away, called the 1970s. And so this is my memory. It might be a memory of others in the room, but it's not a memory for those of you who are college students today. It was a time when, stay with me here, I know this is going to sound fantastical to you, but it's true. In the 1970s, the average American worker had decent benefits, and could afford a car, could afford a home, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted to, and they could afford to send their kids to college. That was the 1970s. In the last 48 years, however, there has been a massive transfer of wealth to the tune of $50 trillion that has gone from the bottom 90% to the top 1% of Americans. Basically, that money was stolen from you. And what happens now is that we're at a point where 39% of Americans in this, the richest country in the world, now report regularly skipping meals in order to pay their rent. 44% of millennials. When I was young, Blue Cross Blue Shield was a nonprofit. Until the 1960s, there was tuition-free college at state colleges and universities. What is going on now is aberrational. Now, I know that because you were born into a time when that's just the way it is, you and I have something in common. You have this rambunctious feeling of, my God, this is ridiculous. I have that same rambunctious feeling of, my God, this is ridiculous, because I remember a time when it wasn't this bad. Now, I'm not whitewashing or romanticizing American capitalism before this period, but I can tell you, once again, because I was there was a time when it was at least accepted that we were supposed to be a fair society. We were supposed to be. There was actually a time, believe it or not, when it was accepted that, well, corporations should try to treat people right. But back in the 1980s, some people say the seeds of it began in the 1970s. Doesn't matter. It came onto the scene full-blown during the administration of Ronald Reagan. That's when trickle-down economics, that's when neoliberalism, that's when what turned out to be hyper-capitalism actually burst onto the scene in the way that it is now. It was the idea that while there are many stockholders in a company, while there are many stakeholders in a company, a worker is a stakeholder. The community in which the corporation exists is a stakeholder. The environment is a stakeholder. Stockholders and CEOs are just two specific stakeholders. But what happened with trickle-down economics is that the idea was introduced that the only responsibility of the corporation should be its fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders. You see, CEOs before the Reagan administration, it wasn't even legal for CEOs to be paid with stock options. Now let's talk about what that means. If you make the stockholders the more important, and particularly if you tell the CEO you can be paid with stock options, the CEO, him or herself, has a conflict of interest, because squeezing every last cent and every bit of safety regulations and every bit of environmental regulations, squeezing every last dime out of every stakeholder so that the stockholders themselves can get more money, becomes the order of the day. Now, it took about 20 years before you really saw this up close and personal in terms of its devastating effects on people's lives. In my own life, it was in the early 2000s that I began to notice how many people who I came into contact with professionally as well as personally were living as a result of the devastating consequences of what turned out to be this hyper-capitalistic paradigm. People who had to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make it. People who did not have decent benefits. People whose unions had been crushed. The demonization of unions. The exaltation of greed itself. All that has led us to where we are. Now, I doubt that anything I just told you is anything you don't already know. At this point, we pretty much do already know. But we have to get very serious and own it. And then we have to take the next step. And that's a pretty serious problem we have on our hands. And that is that the current political status quo is set up to perpetuate, not disrupt what I just told you. Theoretically, the government should be saying, oh, that's got to stop. No, the government's not saying that's got to stop. The government does perpetuate that system. Now, the Republicans on the level of just kind of nosedive for American democracy. But the Democrats, there are 2 kinds of Democrats. You know, they're the corporatists, the established leadership, which is those people are what Republicans were when I was growing up. And so the Democratic Party is trying to have it both ways. So the corporatists are saying, oh yes, you know, she's right to some extent, and we want to help alleviate your stress. You're having to live in an unjust society, but we want to make it better over here when we can, and we want to make it better over there when we can. What does it mean to them to say we want to make it better where we can? Well, we're going to pass a child tax credit, and that child tax credit is going to cut child poverty in half. Great move. Guess what? When it expired 6 months later, they never got around to permanentizing it. It means saying, oh yes, the environment, the climate change is an existential crisis. We got to do something about that. We have investments in our Inflation Reduction Act, and we're going to take on this development of green energy. Yeah, you did. But the problem is that 5% of what you're giving to the defense budget, which is the largest emitter, institutional emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, and you have given more oil drilling permits than even Donald Trump did, and you approved the Willow Project, and you just approved the exportation of liquefied natural gas. At what point do the American people realize we have been played? We have been played. And so now the Republicans represent a nosedive, but the corporatist Democrats represent a managed decline. So I am here on a job interview. That's what a political campaign is. Those of you who are New Hampshire voters are hearing the candidates for the job, and you're going to decide with your vote, who should we give the job to? So I want you to know what I would do if I had the honor and the privilege, if you give me the job. I would cancel Willow Project on day 1. I would cancel Willow Project day 1, and I would name names to the American people, and I would say what is really true. There is a corporate matrix. It's what Franklin Roosevelt, the last president who really laid it down and said it like it is, he called them the economic royalists. They are a matrix of corporate power. They are insurance companies. They are big pharmaceutical companies. They are big agricultural companies and big food companies and big chemical companies and gun manufacturers and big oil companies and defense contractors. And the way this country works today, they are like the aristocrats in old landed Europe. landed gentry. The system works in such a way now that policy after policy is designed to make sure that the industries that I just mentioned to you, that the first thing our policy serves is their short-term profit motive. After that, whatever is left, we hope we can make it better for you guys. We'll shave off some college loan debt over here. You shouldn't even have a college loan debt. It should never have even happened. Public policy is to help you thrive. Right now, we've been so trained to expect too little, we're like thanking them to help us survive the unjust system that they themselves perpetuate. And then they would have you think that, oh, someone like myself is an unserious candidate, unqualified, because what they consider qualified is anyone whose career has been entrenched for decades in the system that drove us into the ditch I've been describing, and then they would have you think that the only people you consider qualified to lead us out of the ditch are those who have helped lead us into the ditch. My qualification is not that I know how to perpetuate that system. My qualification that I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, is I know how to disrupt that system. And that is what I believe is needed now. It will not disrupt itself. That status quo that I just described to you is baked into the cake. Now, this is what I believe the average American should have. And before I say this, I want to make it very clear. What I am saying to you now are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. They would have you think that they would have you think Franklin Roosevelt is a fringe left-wing character, and you must not listen to this person. Excuse me. These are the rights of every citizen in every advanced democracy but ours. Let me tell you these things. Number one, universal health care. We have 68,000 people who die in this country every year from lack of health care. We have 85 million people who are underinsured or uninsured. We have 18 million people who cannot afford to fulfill the prescriptions even if their doctors give them. We have people who are rationing their insulin. We have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt. Now listen to this. If you put the medical debt of all the Americans together in this country, that's $88 billion. Now listen to this figure. If you take the pharmaceutical companies in this country, the top 5 pharmaceutical companies, and you put together their profit last year alone, that was $80 billion. So you're paying for their stockholders to get rich. And in many cases, people are paying with their lives. And that is what we're having to face. And I think what millions of Americans did face during COVID, that system proved during COVID, it would rather people drop dead than in any way undercut their profit margin. We have to wake up here. We have to not be naive. When this lover, after cheating on you and cheating on you and cheating on you, comes back and says, give me one more time, we need to say, no, not again. We've heard the promises and we've had the betrayal, no more. And so you should have universal health care like they do in every other advanced democracy. You should have free college like they have in every other advanced democracy. When you have children, you should have paid family leave like they have in every other advanced democracy. And you should have free childcare like in every other advanced democracy. And you should have guaranteed sick pay like in every other advanced democracy. And you should have a guaranteed livable wage like every other advanced democracy. And when they tell you, oh, you don't have it because it's complicated, close your ears and hear me when I tell you, it's not complicated, it's corrupt. The only reason you don't have universal health care is because of profits for insurance companies. That's the only reason here. But we've all been not only trained to expect too little, and this is what I'm most concerned about. People at this point have almost gone numb. People are just so depressed and living in such chronic economic anxiety and tension from the whole thing. People are beginning to almost subconsciously start to surrender. And we must not. Our ancestors didn't surrender to slavery. Much of the abolitionist movement grew out of early evangelical churches here in New Hampshire. We had slavery in this country, and yet generations rose up and it was abolished. We had institutionalized suppression of women in this country. We had generations rise up past the 19th Amendment with the women's suffrage movement. We had segregation in this country, institutionalized suppression of black people, and a generation rose up and desegregated the American South and passed civil rights legislation. What we are experiencing today is just the latest iteration of that same struggle between the forces of true enlightened democracy and the forces of oppression and suppression that are brought out by ideological and economic values that place no value whatsoever on the real tenets of the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence is our mission statement that all men are created equal. It is our mission statement that God gave inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness to all men. It is our mission statement, read that thing, that governments are instituted to secure those rights, not thwart those rights, not attack those rights, not diminish those rights, Ron DeSantis. And it also says in there that if the government is not doing that job, it is the right of the people to alter it. It is our right to say no more. It is our right to say no more. We have been trained to surrender our power, psychologically trained to this political class like they're the grown-ups and they know what they're doing. And there are a lot of good political technicians, and they say, oh, no, you have to have people who know how to run government. They're like political car mechanics, and some of them are very good political car mechanics, but that's not the problem. The problem is we are on the wrong road. We are 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our democracy. We are 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our economy. We are 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our environment. And the only thing that can turn this car around right now is the same thing that has turned it around in every other generation. The people themselves rise up. And today, it's complicated. It's very complicated because it's not a specific institution. If it is a specific institution, slavery, abolish it. A specific institutionalized reality, the suppression of women. That's the answer. The answer is pass the 19th Amendment. The specific institutional oppression, segregation, dismantle it. Today, it's more like an atomizer spray of injustice. It's environmental degradation over here and sell out to the oil companies over there. It's mass incarceration over here. It's PFAS in the water over there. It's attack on women's rights over here. And so we're always playing whack-a-mole. We got to fix it over here. We got to fix it over there. But no, we got to go down. And we got to see the underlying problem. And the underlying problem is the undue influence of corporate money on our political system. And we have to become as committed to the overturn of Citizens United someday as other people were committed to the overturn of Roe v. Wade. That's not going to happen anytime soon, however. At least it's not reasonable to assume. So the only way to override the deleterious effects, the destructive effects on our democracy of that tyranny of corporate money is for the people to rise up. And if we continue to vote for the status quo, nothing's going to change. And the decline will continue. Now, I just want to say before I open it up to questions, the fascists are at the door. And there are neo-fascist elements that will be assaulting us in the 2024 election. America's young people, that means you, staved them off in many ways in 2022. You know, there has been a kind of accepted wisdom, young people don't vote. Your generation has changed that because these things, this is life and death stuff for you. This is life and death stuff for some of you. And so young people did show up in 22, and young people did show up at the Wisconsin Supreme Court vote the other day. Young people did show up to elect Brandon Johnson in Chicago. You will make the difference if you choose to in 2024. But I'm telling you, it can't be as simple as recognizing that the neo-fascist, neo-authoritarian factors and forces are attacking our democracy from the outside. Neoliberalism and hyper-capitalism itself is eroding it from the inside. So one of the things that the political classes do is they train us to almost think like 7th graders, although that's an insult to 7th graders, that 7th graders do not deserve actually in today's world, but to think in very shallow ways about politics. My experience of Americans is that if we have one-on-one conversations, we're no better and no worse than the people in any other country. But when we get together to have one-on-one conversations, my experience is Americans get real. If I were to talk to any of you individually, or you would talk to each other individually, we get real, we get down, we get authentic. But when it comes to public conversation about politics, we've been trained to keep it shallow and to think in terms of slogans. And that makes us very vulnerable to their triteness and to their cliches and to their promises, which increasingly mean nothing. We have got to be serious thinkers now, no matter who we are. We've got to get all, I don't care if you're 18 or 80. I don't care if you're black, white, brown, man, woman, something else, non-binary, transgender, Jew, Muslim, Christian. We have got to go beyond all that right now. As important as those individual identities can be, we have to remember, e pluribus unum, out of many one, that underlying oneness. We're all Americans. And as Americans, we have two things. We have rights, and yes, we do need to protect those rights. Whether you're transgender, whether you're women, whether you're black, some of those rights are definitely under an assault. But we also have responsibilities. Every generation is the keeper of the story. When I was younger, they used to use that expression, to form a more perfect union. We need to protect the rights that we have. We need to recognize that many of them are under attack, and we have to own the responsibility which comes from that role. This is not just about you or me. This is about us. This is about something bigger than any of us individually. Our ancestors rose up, sometimes at great sacrifice, and did what needed to be done. So that over the course of time, the trajectory has been we tend to course correct when necessary. Let's not be the first generation to wimp out on doing the job of what it will take to get this country back on track. Our democracy has swerved. We can't pretend that it hasn't, but we can put it back on track. And I believe that if you elect me president, I won't have a magic wand, no president does, nor should an American president have a magic wand. The president works with two co-equal branches of government. The president does not, you don't want a dictator, but I believe that I can help begin on a fundamental level a season of repair. And it begins with America looking in the mirror. And I know that we need to look in the mirror in order to begin a new beginning. We need to be honest. We need to clean up the past in order to go forward. We need to admit to ourselves what the real problems are in order to move into an era of fundamental economic reform, so that you can have universal health care, so that you can have free college, so that we can get rid of those college loan debts, so that we can seriously move in a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy, so that you will have a habitable planet, so that we can move from a war economy to a peace economy. It will not be easy. It will not be easy as president. But if you help me get there, then I can promise you this. We will begin, and you will be able to feel it. You will know that you have a president really on your side. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.